Chair.
Thank you. I'm calling it to order, and I have two items. One, I'd like to move item 5 to the end of the agenda because it's going to require a lot of discussion. Is there any problem with anybody from that? No? Okay. And I have some questions that I need answered on Gordon Avenue. I think probably we all have a few questions that we'd like to ask. So perhaps I could just start with that, if you don't mind. I think everyone here has met with the residents of Gordon Avenue, and as it's our land use committee, could we get a copy of the RFP that you might have half prepared or something so that we can find out indeed the what the parameters are for the care of the residents in that building if it should go ahead? There's a lot of misinformation out there, and we understood. Some of us have very limited knowledge as well because we weren't able to get the information given to us at the last land use committee. What the parameters are, will there be 24 hours, you know, the beds, how long people can stay there, and that would be stuff that would be in the RFP so the operator would know that. And could you please tell me why the CN or CP Railway, or whoever the heck they are, does not have fencing beside the railroad tracks? I always thought that was a safety issue, and when they went by a residential area, they had to have fencing. And to tell me that the people that put up the fences is enough is an absolute crock. So I want to know, and I want to see them out here building fences by next Monday. So if you could get that answer, I'd really appreciate it. Does anyone else have anything they want to ask before this? No? Neil?
Just offer a comment on that. When I was down there, May, I went and looked specifically.
You were there, yeah.
And on the residential side of the tracks, there is a fence. It's at the low side, down the berm from the right of way. It's about maybe 5 feet high.
But it's not
and it's not complete.
No. Oh. So we need to know that.
And my understanding is it was fenced both sides. That's what I read somewhere, but it doesn't certainly appear to be.
So we need some clarification on that. So thank you very much. So first item.
I do.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So yeah, clarification on what Councillor Reid just said, but also wondering about clarification of the utilization of the 4 floors of the building that's planned. Would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, first item, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first item is the minutes of this committee's meeting held Monday, October 25th. Recommendations to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second. In favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item.
Next item, item 2, is an authorization for the issuance of a DVP for 3368 David Avenue. The recommendation is that Council approve the signing and sealing of this DVP and that the Mayor and City Clerk be authorized to execute it.
So moved.
Seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, and I might add that the question I had this morning for staff was that this is a one-off. So this is a one-off project just simply because of the retention ponds, the roads, and there's a myriad of problems, just so you know. So I have a mover, a seconder. Any questions? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 3 is a preliminary report on application for zoning amendment bylaw 4160. This pertains to 365 and 369 Mundy Street. Recommendation is to give first reading to bylaw 4160 and that it be referred to public hearing.
So moved.
I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Done. That was really well. Item 4.
Item 4. Item 4 is also a preliminary report. This one pertains to an application for zoning amendment bylaw 4161 and the 5% park dedication provisions for a proposed subdivision at 1415 Coast Meridian Road. Recommendations to give first reading to bylaw 4161, that it and its related application be referred to public hearing, and that Council require the owner to provide 5% cash in lieu.
So moved.
Second.
Questions? Councillor Robinson?
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. The houses along on Coast Meridian on the other side, what's planned to be there? So it'll be backyards on the one side of Coast Meridian, and then across the street at 1408.
Yes, through the chair.
Will that be backyards as well, or front yards?
Through the chair, on the other side across Coast Meridian to the west, those will be front yard. We have, that application is currently before staff. The current layout does show a lane paralleling Coast Meridian. In order to achieve a front streetscape along Coast Meridian, it is most desirable typically to have a front, so you don't get the rear of the homes. On this side, however, because the pattern's already been established immediately to the south of this property, we've continued the pattern, but we are controlling the design of the back of those homes through a design scheme, which the applicant has agreed to.
So those backyards might look a little bit more like front yards so that we have a balanced streetscape?
Through the chair, that is exactly correct. That is the intent of the actual design restrictions on those lots.
Great, and I'm curious about this walkway as well. Will that be sort of like a well-marked walkway? And the reason I ask is that in Ranch Park there's all these great walkways, but no one knows exactly where they are. Well, at least I don't. But so if there's a way to make sure that as people navigate through these residential areas that there's some real clear, and I'm assuming that will be for bicycles as well, given that it's an east-west rather than a north-south. It'll be really easy to...
Yes, through the chair, we will provide you further details on that specifically. Great. If you so wish. It is a short walkway, so it will be, I think, easily marked from beginning to end, and it is multi-use.
Great, excellent, thank you.
Okay, no further questions. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go to item 6, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Item 6 is change to School District 43 and its 2010 eligible school sites proposal. Recommendations that Council accept the proposal as submitted.
So moved.
Seconder?
Second.
Okay. If I may, this morning the conversation with staff was that even through our discussions with respect to community space in schools and all that, that will be coming along. As to the sizes of the lands, it doesn't really have any bearing on how many fields will or wouldn't be built, etc. And there was a time limit on this for 60 days. And I understand that we can just move this forward to Council. I did have a discussion with Councillor McDonnell about this, and I did get his questions answered. So, there's no questions. All in favor? Carried.
Item 7 is a joint report of the General Manager of Plan Development and the Manager of Economic Development pertaining to the Maillardville core commercial area and potential development incentives. You see a 4-part recommendation before you. That staff be directed to prepare a tax exemption program, that staff be directed to review the density provisions, that staff be directed to review density provisions in the core area through the second phase of the neighborhood plan, and that Council continue to consider the merits of rezoning application and variances to the commercial and residential parking requirements in Maillardville.
So moved.
Conversations this morning with respect to this was perhaps we're sort of preempting this just a bit, in that we have the 30,000-foot committee coming in and hopefully going to have some ideas on revitalization and other things, and that we could refer this to that committee just for information and hope it comes back, in December sometime. So that's one idea. The second part was the way it's actually going to, the exemption and how it's going to be based on the assessment authority. And in case it's not clear, perhaps Mr. McIntyre could just speak to that. I think that's quite important. And the third, the rationale before you speak to it, was Langley. And Langley is a very poor choice because Langley's been a little city ever since it began. So they have a nucleus to begin with, which is what we don't have. And that is about all the comments, I guess. So, Mr. McIntyre?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll provide some comments in response to those questions, and if Mr. Beggs wants to speak as well, he may. The example of the City of Langley. We cast around, we wanted to make sure if we're coming forward with a recommended program, we wanted to see, because we understand the number of municipalities have put this system in place, and some have worked better than others, but we wanted just to scan the dial to see what the experiences were elsewhere, what worked, what didn't work so well, so we'd make sure this would be hopefully more successful. The assessment piece, and this, you're quite right, Councillor Reid, this is where it does get a little bit complicated, so I'll try to walk through an example. And in fact, I think we're seeing some of that happening out there right now. But say someone owns a property there on Brunette, in that sort of the heart of the Maillardville commercial core. And they wanted to renovate the building, maybe freshen up the main floor. They might have a commercial tenant, maybe a restaurant coming in, requires some fairly extensive renovations in the kitchen area and fire suppression and all that. They want to put new glass and a new front on it. Maybe they want to have a little outdoor patio. And so they come in for an alteration permit to our building permits division. And in that application, they indicate what the estimated construction works were. And say they estimate it to be $200,000 worth of work. And so we go through, review it, and approve it, and the work gets done and inspected. They would then, because the BC Assessment Authority monitors building permits issued by the city, it would pop up on their screen. At some point, they would probably send someone out to have a look at it and say, nice work. But it would also add to the assessed value of the building. And so what we're talking about here would be basically a tax holiday for 5 years on that improvement to the building assessed value. So they may have spent $200,000 through the actual construction, and paid the contractors and subs and so on and so forth. But BC Assessment, they may assess it differently. They may assess it as a $100,000 increase, $150,000, or they may think that, wow, this is really, dress this building up, it might be worth $300,000 more. So that's the one piece that we don't have control on, because the city accepts what BC Assessment Authority identifies the assessment. So it would be that part there that would get the increment in the assessed value for the building, for the commercial component, we get the 5-year tax holiday. So it's a little bit tricky, but that's the best example I can provide.
Got that straight as mud, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, any further questions? Mr. Rasmussen.
Thank you. Just to go through this a little bit, and I like the idea of actually having this should be referred to that new committee for input before it comes back to council for more advice. I think that's a great idea, Councillor Reid. My other point comes down on the tax issue and how we deal with that. And we know we're talking about Maillardville, but we have other cities and other areas of the city. So let's say for Coquitlam, Austin, that are looking for revitalization. Do we move that into their areas also? Northeast in the future with Pardon Creek, we want to attract people out to that area. Do we wind up doing the same type of incentives out in that area? So this is just not going to be for the north, for Maillardville, but it's going to be tax incentives that we're talking about for the whole city in all these areas.
Could be.
Okay, so I want to find out about that part and have understanding on that part. Okay, because you will have these other areas saying, well, if you're doing it for area X, and why aren't you doing it for our areas also to create equitable across it? Because you may say this area where we feel council is more important, they may have a different view on that area, on that part. Then it gets down to the issue is the taxpayer funding improvements through their taxes from the whole to this special area. That's another question that needs to be asked. Is it a subsidy to these areas? And the one part about, and the last comment I'm going to make is, and I agree with staff to go on a case-by-case basis, but I'm very leery about any area, Maillardville area, about how we make sure about the parking in that area. We've got to be very careful on how we move forward. I know developers always love to say, yes, let's reduce because they save money on that. But what are we left for to attract people and make a good community with that parking? So that's another concern. Thank you.
Okay, well, on the parking, I have a giant pink no. Ever since I got over Como Lake Village, I have a definite fright of parking spots. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I actually differ a little bit from Councillor Asmussen around, yes, there are other areas that will look for, to attract commercial development, but I think this community has some unique challenges and unique needs that others may not face. And so I'm curious, how long has the Maillardville Revitalization Task Force been around? How long has this council been?
Forever.
Forever?
Long time.
Well, 6 years.
A long time?
At least prior to 2007, Madam Chair.
2007.
At least prior to that. I only have a record before me back to that
so,
date.
So if it's 6 or 7 years, so clearly previous councils have decided that this area warrants a bit of extra attention for numerous reasons, I suspect. And I remember the report from Mr. Vance really did speak to some of the challenges in terms of how property is, there's many different landowners, and to bring properties together is really very challenging in this particular area. So I think it actually, I don't know that one necessarily necessitates another, but for now, the discussion that's before us is around for this particular area, and at some point later on, we may want to carry it on to others or not. That's decision of council, is my understanding. So I'm curious about this business improvement area plan that Langley had. And if you could just tell me a little bit about what they did and what that means, I would find that a little bit helpful in terms of trying to understand what kind of potential that might bring.
Okay, Mr. McIntyre.
Thanks, Madam Chair. A couple of good points were raised and some questions there, so I'll try to address those. Starting with the last one, the BIA, Business Improvement Area. And this is, again, through our discussions with City of Langley staff, that's one of the things they said. It's a combination of factors that they felt that came together to create success there. The revitalization tax credit program, is a piece of that. It certainly sends a clear signal to the market, but that went along with other things, and particularly the BIA, the Business Improvement Area. So you have the property owners, the businesses, owners coming together, working collectively in their better interests. So, and I think we flagged that in the report. We're making these recommendations. We like to help stimulate redevelopment and revitalization and business success down there, but that also in part is the responsibility of the businesses there, and so they need to come together. We want to encourage that. The parking variances, yeah, that's can be kind of touchy. I think that's what we've dealt with. Is just let's address those on a case-by-case basis. If a parking variance is being sought for development, let's see the merit and rationale in that and see what the impacts are. Is this a subsidy, and would this apply to other areas? And staff wrestle with that too, because anytime you come forward with a policy, a public policy piece, you focus on one area of the community only. You need to be careful, because we want to be equitable in our treatment of the various neighborhoods across the city. But here we felt, and because there's been a lot of attention for a while around Maillardville, the task force and that, and I know as long as I've been with the city here, and that's going over 5 years, Maillardville has got a lot of attention, and there is some indications of redevelopment, but it really hasn't taken off yet. So we thought that this piece, again, it should be seen as part. We should be encouraging others down there to come together, but this would be part of hopefully turning things around. We think a special case can be made for this area. If in time it proves successul, there may be other areas we might want to extend this to, North Road, for example. But at this point in time, we're recommending it solely for Maillardville, but it really should be viewed in combination with some other initiatives. Is it a subsidy? Again, we wrestle with that, and the logic that we landed on is not really. The premise of this, the philosophy behind this program is it's private sector investment receiving some public sector benefit. It's not that you're reducing the taxes. You're not reducing what the existing tax revenue from that area is. You're just giving a little bit of a break for new investment. So it's not an outright subsidy such that people are seeing their tax bill decrease. It's just that increment is being protected for 5 years or a phase-in period. So we didn't see it as a subsidy from the broader taxpayer. It's just a little bit of a break for those commercial taxpayers in a 5-year period. So those are my comments. And
So if I can just just encapsulate what we just said. So in some ways, it's like an investment. It's just an investment rather than a subsidy. Is the way to think about it. Okay, thank you very much.
If I can just add on to that, what it does, it invigorates the neighborhood so that someone else might want to move in and start paying taxes that you never had in the first place. So in a way it works. Neil?
Thank you. I think between Councillor Robinson and Mr. McIntyre said almost everything that I was going to say. This report is just a little over a year since Council endorsed a recommendation from the Maillardville Commercial Cultural Revitalization Task Force, which was a long time in coming. So we've been looking at this for a long, long time. Council supported the recommendation from the task force, but a consultant to work supported the report of the consultant, directed staff to get to this point. And I think they've done a good job coming up with something that's even-handed. It's attractive, I think, to investment. It will help to accelerate what inevitably has to happen in Maillardville, but not at a cost to the city. In fact, it'll accelerate the creation of greater tax base in that area and greater opportunities for everybody, commercial, residential, in that area. So I'm in support of it. I'd be all in favor of sending it to the 30, I'm never going to be able to call it anything but the 30,000-foot committee. Thank you, May. I'd like them to be aware of it, but I don't think Council's decision should await their response.
It shouldn't. I agree.
Thank you.
Councillor Lynch.
Thank you, Chair Reid. I wasn't just waving at you. I was trying to get on the speaking list.
Waving helps.
I did
Money
that.
helps.
I did. I was going to throw my pen next. But I remember when even in the report references at least a year ago, and it was much before that. We took, at one point, I think we went to a conference, we had some meetings, and Surrey had brought in something like this, and I was surprised that Surrey wasn't referenced more. And at that time at the Revitalization Committee for Maillardville, we discussed this, and we asked our staff to go away. It came forward to council. We've gone round, round, round. I really would hate to see this be stymied by, and I agree, perhaps sending to the committee so they can at least have a look at it and give some input onto the consultation. But I would like to see this go forward as a recommendation. And I think, I sort of stated, but I feel I need to restate it, and that is that initially this would be Maillardville because there is a bit of a unique case to be made for. We have been trying for a lot of years, trying to find something. We've had many meetings. We've directed staff to come forward and give us something to go forward with. And now, Mr. Beggs has been able to bring this forward. And I think that, yes, if this is successful, of course we'll use it in other areas of the community. And I think Coquitlam would be one of the first places that we look at right after Maillardville, I think, or perhaps even Austin Heights, but I don't think they're in the same type of situation. And it's the type of things that we need to do based on what's been successful in other cities to try to break whatever's got a stranglehold on that community and prevents it from moving forward. And we need to start looking at whatever we have and start putting some more tools in the toolbox and move forward with this.
Okay, I guess you like it, huh?
I'll vote in favor.
Councillor Raymond?
Thank you. I too am fully supportive of this. I think that this will go a long way to assisting the residents of Maillardville in providing them the hope that they've been looking for a very long time. And I do agree that we could refer this to the committee, but I want to move this ahead to full council at the moment. It's been a long time coming, and we need to get on with it. And one thing, when it is referred to the 30,000-foot committee, I just want to make sure that we clarify and highlight the character of Maillardville and the history behind this report and the history of Maillardville and that sort of thing to the committee. So thank you.
Good. Okay, well, I'm really happy to refer this on. The only thing I will have a problem with is the variances on the parking, and that is something I'm going to be really interested in seeing what you come up with. So, everyone's been heard from? Oh.
Just for clarity, Madam Chair, that the moving and second is sending this on to council, and at council a motion to refer it to the committee would be in order at that time.
Yeah, and I think this committee, it was more for discussion whether this would be sort of an item that we wanted to see at that committee, and I think it is, because I think it's an innovative idea that's here, and maybe they can add to it. So that's the beauty of it. So, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Going back now to the biggie, item 5.
Item 5 concerns housing choices, and it pertains to the official community plan bylaw and zoning amendments to permit new innovative housing types in neighborhood attached residential land use designations in southwest Coquitlam. There's a series of 10 recommendations, which with the leave of the committee, I won't read out at this time. And we have a short presentation on screen to provide as well.
Yeah. Okay, if I may, before we go any further on this morning we had quite a long discussion about all of this. And I think at the end of it, we sort of thought that after discussion from all of you, because I said there's going to be lots of input from all the council members on this, and then it can go back to staff for a little more clarity. When we go out to the public with something, we already last year went out with a letter that went to, I guess, all of Austin Heights, and it created no end of angst with people. And so it's come back, and as far as the Austin area goes, you'll see on the map that where we're starting this out, even though this may well work for the whole of Coquitlam, all these zoning, because we're trying to do what we've done with the commercial zones, which is get our zones in order and try and reduce them in size and to have a bit more clarity. But one of the first problems that came up is when you look at all the housing types and the options and the pretty pictures. And we're back to what I'm going to call the muffin top. Just love calling it that. So as a realtor, I get calls from other realtors saying, what in blazes is a whatever, a carriage house, a coach house, a lane house, there's so many names for all of these, and it just seems there's no clarity. So the one thing we want to do is have clarity in what we send out. So not calling it a muffin top, but it could be a loft top. It could be a carriage house, which is, we're just speaking now about a small apartment over a double garage. So there's all kinds of names for it. But I think what we need to do is come up with one that we're happy with, and that's where we stay. And then do you want to call some of these houses lane houses? Do you want to call them coach houses? Carriage houses, to me, still denote where you would park a carriage and have an apartment above. So instead of calling it a loft house, you could call it a carriage house. One of the big developers likes that idea. So before we go out, I think we need to get quite prescriptive on what we're calling what they are. Does that make sense? So that's the one big thing. The other thing, we got into a lot of it's onto the duplex lots, and that's primarily this area that they have outlined. And I think maybe I'm going to get Mr. McIntyre to give a bit of a presentation on that. But the things that bother me most about this is where we have some of the people who have duplexes now, and they're really old duplexes, but they're really fourplexes, which they're not supposed to be. This is not going to be a free ride for these people to come in and get rezoned to a fourplex. It just isn't going to happen. We're talking about new construction. So that's one thing. Then we go into the coach houses. And so there's that opportunity, which is a coach house at the back, which would be it's an accessory to the main house. And then when you get into some of these duplex lots, they're massive down in Maillardville. You can get 8, 9, 10, 12,000 square foot lots. And some of them could literally be divided into 4 smaller lots, which then they could be strated and not actually called a coach house or a carriage house or anything else. So those were all the conversations we had. We also had a conversation about how we protect when we go into RS1 or RS7 or wherever we want to go, whatever zone we have, that we want to allow them to have a coach house in the back, but they can or cannot have a suite in the main house. So a lot of it could depend on lot size. A lot of it could depend on, I guess, location. There's just a whole bunch of stuff going on here. So that was sort of the conversation we had this morning. Mr. McIntyre, I'm going to let you add on and then just open it up for a really good discussion, workshop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's a good description of where we're at. Just a few opening remarks, but if I could ask the Russell Nelson, who was the person that worked on this, if he's got a presentation, a brief one prepared, And if we just go through that, I think it would help in illustrating. And actually, the picture up there on the screen right now, I guess that's what we had thought it would be a coach house. I believe that's from the project in South Surrey we had a look at there back in the summer in drier weather. And you see this is looking from the back of the lot, and there's the two-car garage with a unit above it. So that's one type. But I'll turn that to Russell in just a moment. But no, you're quite correct. The housing choices piece, it's been a little while in coming, and we've had a number of information meetings. There's been focus group discussions with particularly some of the builders and developers in southwest Coquitlam. There seemed to be a lot of interest, but equally so, I think there were some concerns as well. So it's just important to note that what we're talking about today is we're focusing on the area. This was the former duplex zones, and there's an attachment 1 that has the map that delineates those clearly. So we're not talking about wide across southwest Coquitlam. This is sort of focusing on these areas of neighborhood attached residential, i.e. the former duplex zone. So it's trying to get a little more choice, a few more options, some opportunity for creativity in those areas, depending, as you say, on the lot size, on the neighborhood context, and so on. So with that, if I could, if maybe Russell can walk us through and show you, trying to illustrate what we're proposing. If there's a desire to get a little clearer and descriptive in how we label these things so people can really grasp it, fair enough. Let's get that feedback. Let's have that discussion.
Got to have clarity. Do you have pictures? We're really excited about pictures.
Absolutely.
Good.
So staff is very pleased to bring forward for your consideration this afternoon a series of bylaw amendments and associated recommendations for the implementation of the city's Housing Choices Initiative. As you will recall, Housing Choices began as a policy analysis initiative under the banner of the Southwest Coquitlam Area Plan Update that began back in the latter half of 2000 and then was concluded with Council's adoption of the plan in July of 2009. And with that, it brought in new housing choices related policies and the creation of a new land use designation as delineated on the map there on your screen. And that's that brown shaded area that's up in the Coquitlam, Lougheed, Maillardville, and partially in the Austin Heights area. So what we brought forward for you today is a series of bylaw amendments and those related recommendations to facilitate and the development of the following types of housing choices. So there's 5 in total that we're going to look at a little bit today. The first one being accessory coach house. The second one looking at narrow lot 1 family subdivision.
Before you, can you go back to where
Sure.
were you? The first one was the coach house.
Correct.
So that's the part over the garage. So I've been calling it the muffin top. So it's just the top.
Sure. Name to be clarified.
Name to be clarified, not muffin top, but that's okay.
Name to be clarified. We'll just use the accessory coach house as just a point of reference for now.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So near lot 1 family.
Get back to that one.
Sure.
I want to be really clear about these, Russell, because I see them more than these guys, but it's really important. So these are just they're 2-story houses.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, do they have suites or not?
What's being proposed, and I'll get into the details in a moment, but yeah, part of the proposal is looking at suites and potentially coach houses as well.
And how big are these lots?
The minimum lot size is 370 square meters and a 10-meter minimum lot frontage or lot width.
So we're 33 feet almost.
Yep, that's correct.
So that in Maillardville, a lot of the lots down there are 66 wide by 130 to 150 feet long. Okay.
Yes, that's correct. The next one, looking at a detached version of a 2-unit project. Next one is...
Go back to that one.
Sure.
And explain what that one is then.
Sure.
We're going to do this right, so.
Oh, no problem. So this is looking at a duplex that's not attached. It's giving some flexibility, still allowing 2 principal units in 2 principal dwellings on a lot.
And would they be allowed to have suites?
No.
Okay.
Next one is a triplex or a 3-unit development. So a single lot accommodating up to 3 units, 3 principal units. They could be attached, all detached, or combination thereof. And I think one of the common threads through all the proposals that are being presented here is providing some level or degree of flexibility, looking at the site circumstances, the lot constraints, and then using that as a point of departure to provide, in this case, a 3-unit project that may have some attached or detached components to it.
And if I may, if anybody wants to jump in and ask questions while Russell's going through, please just feel free. This is more of a workshop spot right now. So thank you.
And then the last of the 5, quadruplex or a 4-unit project. Same as the 3, allowing for 4 dwelling units in either an attached or detached or combination thereof form. Little bigger lot size is required for this proposal. Again, no suites. It's about 4 principal dwellings.
Now, if I may stop you here, is the one on the bottom the one we saw in North Van?
Correct.
On 17th Street. Was everybody there?
Oh.
No? Okay. Well, this was a big lot close to where I used to live, but this was a really big lot, and it's just absolutely beautiful. They've taken it, and they've got 4 of these houses on the one big lot, and it's absolutely stunning.
So the next series of slides I'll just describe sort of what the components of or the elements of the bylaw amendments, and that is also an opportunity to kind of burrow in a little bit on some of the discussion of the different types. So attached to the staff report, what's presented is 4 bylaws, 4 amendment bylaws, and the first one is an OCP amendment bylaw, and it's kind of 2 parts. The first being more minor enabling amendments to provide some more overtly clarity and to more overtly account for the new regulatory measures that are being presented for the different housing types, so a bit of description change. But the most substantive part of this bylaw is a proposed inclusion of a new development permit area and associated guidelines as it relates to 3- and 4-unit developments, so the tri or quadruplex. The next proposed change is 2 zoning bylaw amendments, and we'll talk about all the specifics of here that I've got noted in kind of this summary slide. So the first one is a series of changes to the RT1 zone, and then the introduction of a new RT3 zone that would accommodate the 3- and 4-unit or the tri and quadruplex unit or housing choice types.
May I stop you there?
Sure.
The RT1 is 8,000 and above, but is RT3 10,000 and above, or is there any size differential?
Yes, and I'll get into the particulars in a moment on that, but yes, the triplex has a certain minimum lot size and frontage, as does the quadruplex. It spells out the 2.
I have a question also about accessory coach house, just to get language correct. Are we referring both to the muffin top version, the loft version, as well as the traditional more carriage house?
As it's
We're using the coach house refers to both.
Sure. As it's currently described or currently articulated here, absence of any comments here. So as it's currently described here, it's flexibility of either or. There's no delineation in terms of the term or name is whether it's above, at grade, or a combination thereof.
Jim?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Just on this point, and I'm sure Russell will get to this in a few minutes, but committee members present may recall from some of those town hall meetings, there's a lot of questions around this, and I think it's a really important slide to digest. So in that area, the RT1 zoning is what applies now. So under that, under the program we're bringing forward, so by that you could, without rezoning, you could have a coach house, accessory coach house. You could do the narrow subdivision, which would go through the approving officer, or you could have the detached 2-dwelling unit project. If, however, you wanted to go up in density, I think that was the big question, is like, what is the process? What differentiates? You then get into the rezoning. So you'd be then applying to the RT3 zone to go to a triplex or a quadplex. So in that way, it comes before council. It's put out to the community, the neighborhood. There's a public hearing, and so people have the involvement that way. With the RT1 stuff, there's not a development permit. With the RT3, there would be development permits, but we're proposing that that be delegated to staff, but it would be after it's gone through that public hearing process for council's consideration. So I just want to be very clear on that point.
Go ahead, Brent.
Just going back to the carriage house and the design, I like the idea of the carriage house, not the full building.
Not muffin top.
The muffin top, just the top part, the carriage part. But the concern I come back and I'm just thinking about is the narrow lot or the 10-meter lots, and the idea, to me, it would be either or, because you're already getting, even in this area, a density of a narrow lot to increase density, but adding in a suite and a coach house, to me, seems problematic within the parking in that area. I could see it being either or and getting buy-in from the community. But I think you'd really be pushing the envelope because you got that narrow lot density already happening by increasing the units on a narrow lot. And I think to allowing those potentially 3 living units on that narrow lot would really cause difficulties on the parking end of it, and just thinking the public's livability. So that's one part that I'm really concerned about. I think when we get into those options when we're talking about these and the triplexes, Councillor Reid was saying, I think there's minimum lot sizes where you have to have these things. So if you're having a suite, and then you get, because if you're getting into a quadruplex, if you have a house and 2 suites, that's almost the same thing on a 10-meter lot. But here we're saying you got to have a minimum lot size to build that. So it seems a little contradictory. So I would prefer, as we move forward, to eliminate the ability of having it would be either or, a suite in the house or your above garage carriage house, however we term that, but not both.
Okay, so this is what they're talking about now, because I was confusing it with Northeast as well.
It's not, totally, no, it has not, I know it has.
Okay, good.
I understand.
And I'm with you on that, and I said the only way we can do it with is restrictive covenants and all that, but we'll let Russell go on.
Okay. Okay.
Isn't that fun? Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so next slide. Thanks. So ignore the name, just use it as a placeholder for now. So the accessory coach houses. So here's some of the particulars that are nested within the amendment bylaw as presented. So looking at coach house, giving some minimum lot size, looking at height, location, preference for access, parking requirements, and also one of the recommendations, or a companion recommendation, included that council directs staff to prepare a manual or guide for future applicants to help them negotiate getting these type of things built. So the second one, narrow lot. Here again, looking at a minimum lot area of 370 square meters, 10-meter lot width. Again, comments already on the coach house and secondary suites, looking at having both of those as contained in the proposal. Again, minimum parking standards would be maintained. And in this situation, again, as Jim has alluded to, we're focused in on the neighborhood attached residential land use designation only for these particular. So the amendments are worded as such so that there's some clarity as where it is applying to. The detached 2-unit, again, it's just providing some additional flexibility as opposed to the traditional duplex, allowing that detached form. All the other regulatory measures would be maintained, but in order to kind of account for some of the different form and character nuances that a detached would bring about, one of the recommendations to council being suggested here that they direct staff to prepare some updates to the city's existing duplex design guidelines.
Go ahead.
I guess when we talk about, and I guess it comes out when you have a narrow lot detached and then you got a detached duplex, what's the technical difference?
Technical difference here is what's being proposed is no change in the minimum lot area and minimum lot frontage that a duplex currently requires. Okay. So current requires 740. That isn't changing. What the only critical change here is not requiring that attachment of the unit. So it allows them to break it out, and if you have some irregular shaped lots particularly, I think that starts to free up and provide a little bit of flexibility for those kind of circumstances. They may meet all the lot area requirements, everything else, but their frontage doesn't necessarily lend itself easily to doing a traditional side-by-side. So this just opens up and gives a little flexibility
And
to
no
that.
suites in these, right?
Absolutely not, no. The triplex, again, minimum lot size 740 square meters, needing a minimum lot frontage of 20. Looking for those density provisions, access preferred to a lane. Here's a little bit departure that will need some good discussion. Looking at, in order to accommodate more dwelling units on a lot, it becomes a challenge to provide the 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit. So one of the things being entertained and prepared or for your consideration is looking at a reduction to that 1.5. And that, just as a side note, that is something that our folks in North Van use for all their 3 and 4 unit projects. They use that 1.5 as a parking space ratio. Again, noted, got some DP guidelines prepared as under one of the bylaws, and looking for staff delegation in terms of administration of that. And last but not least, the quadruplex, again, a number of similarities to the triplex, big difference being the minimum lot area and lot frontage that would be required in order to accommodate that. Again, looking to our North Van counterparts, that 10,000 square foot or that 930 square meters is roughly in keeping to what they apply and have in a lot of the examples we've seen. And last but not least, we included some additional recommendations, a few other things about tracking and monitoring of housing choices. Made a couple of recommendations on how to kind of provide information on that front. Also, we've been working in close discussion with our counterparts throughout the city and others dealing with servicing and servicing strategy for these lots. So we're in preparation for that, and our recommendation will bring forward something for council's consideration. And then finally, just some further communication to our counterparts out in the development community, asking for your agreement to provide this report to them.
Now, before you go off that slide,
Yes.
this little building here, years ago in Maple Ridge and other communities around the province, they used to call these granny flats. And they are just little ranchers. In our case, you said they would be attached to the garage, correct? But ground level. So instead of being a muffin top, they'd just be attached to the garage as the little 450 square foot apartment, but at ground level. So that's another option, that's another choice that staff have brought in. So now do you see why we need a lot of discussion about this?
So in conclusion or summary, so what's being presented today, what staff perceive is really kind of round one of a series of bylaw amendments and related recommendations to assist in the implementation of housing choices. It is not intended to address all of the housing types that have been part of our community's conversation over the last several years, but rather these amendments just provide a first step with a goal in mind of securing some noteworthy success stories. We're really looking for some good, innovative projects to come forward that we can gain some understanding over and some good track record. So this is incremental, it's a considered approach, and the lessons learned over the next little while will help inform what we do subsequent and following. So again, this approach, it's resulted in some what I think is some good provisions. It provides a good level of predictability and further definition that's needed at this time in order to get our housing choices projects moving forward. So,
Thank you. Any questions?
I thank you very much for this. It's pretty exciting, especially in context of the revitalization question that we just had in that whole discussion, because I think this is part and parcel of that. It's not anything separate. It's part of the same area. So I'm pleased to see that we're starting with the places that probably need a little bit more encouragement and support. So I have a couple of questions. The quadruplex 1.5 parking space sort of idea, what do they have in North Van? And does it work for them? Same, and it works for them. It's sort of, is it a non-issue, or is it an ongoing battle, or?
As far as our discussions with their staff, it's a non-issue for them.
Okay.
Yeah, with the higher density projects, it takes on a different flavor in terms of who ends up occupying those.
Yep. Different market, different kinds of folks. What does our fire service think about these kinds of densities? Have we had conversation with them?
Absolutely. We've had frequent and ongoing conversations with them and others throughout the city. An interdepartmental group has been working on, and part of the discussion will bring forward sort of under that umbrella of servicing agreement that will bring forward some particulars and the discussions that we've had and conclusions in terms of how it relates to our firefighting folks.
Okay, and I have two other questions. One, do these kinds of housing, or how do these kinds of housing help with affordable housing stock?
There's certainly an opportunity for that to happen. Obviously, you get more units on a piece of ground that costs X amount. You're starting to amortize the cost of that land over a number of units as opposed to a single one. But that said, cost of construction, buildable square foot is cost of construction, buildable square foot. So that doesn't necessarily translate, but I think there's an opportunity here. And then certainly with our coach homes, I mean, we're really seeing this as a mortgage helper on the one hand for the principal homeowner, but certainly it is providing a rental space, rental units that we're not necessarily seeing built in a much larger capacity, like in an apartment form or something like that. So I think it's a good incremental way to add that type of housing stock.
Okay.
Mr. McIntyre?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and Councillor Robinson. If I could, it's just that. It's housing choices, and it's it's the ground-oriented housing choices. So if people, young families, or other people in the life cycle, they don't want to be in a townhouse or an apartment building or a condo tower over here. It just gives another choice. They may have grown up in that neighborhood. They like those established areas. They want a little newer residents. And by doing this, you're getting greater efficiency in the use of the land. So there's more units per square foot. So the cost of the land is being shared over those units, and you can get those lower costs. I think also it provides flexibility for people at different points in their life cycle. If it makes sense to have that detached unit out in the back, I know when my kids are getting to a point, I'd just as soon not have them under my roof. But out in the backyard may just be fine, or maybe an older parent. I think Raul wanted to comment as well. I think he has some experience from Surrey, where a lot of this stuff is actually being built right now.
Yes, Madam Chair. Just a comment around the unit types. The palette of choices described by Russell really speak to two different types, really in form. One would be a potentially stratified unit in a duplex or triplex or quadruplex that could be sold off, and that someone would want to live in a smaller unit that is a ground-oriented unit. The other would be essentially an accessory residential unit in a coach house that cannot be stratified and would essentially be a mortgage helper to the person on that lot. So it kind of crosses both the issue of unit types and tenure, and so there's a variety of those type of choices available. And certainly my experience in Surrey isn't as in terms of this level of diversity. I think this actually provides a much greater range of diversity of units in a much more progressive way, I should say. I think this can give that both combination of affordable units that can be sold off as strata units, as well as helpers on single-family lots to allow people to buy these units at a more affordable rate.
Great. Well, thank you. And I have one last question, if I might. It has to do with how the maps are drawn, and I was looking at them yesterday, and I'm trying to figure out, can't we draw in straight lines? Like it's and if you could just provide some rationale for why things are not drawn in at least boxier format, that would be just really helpful.
Sure. In short, the designation is a near one-to-one correspondence with properties that have RT1 zoning in place. When that zoning came into place is many decades old, and the Yes, it has a very irregular shape, but it is what it is. So when the Southwest Plan was adopted and we needed a placeholder for housing choices, that designation, it seemed to make sense that we've already got zoned properties. We're already seeing an evolution of those in many cases from a one-family to a two-family. There was some logic to having that mirrored one for one at that time. But one of the secondary pieces that was included in the neighborhood or the area plan was when neighborhood plans were done, Austin Heights being one of them, that boundary would get some consideration. And if indeed could be some more even-handed or clarity brought to bear so we wouldn't end up with such a circuitous boundary, that would be an opportunity to have that conversation both at the community, but then to give some resolution and clarification around that.
I think that would just be really helpful. People don't understand, like, why is this piece in and not this other piece when it's just across the street, but it goes around my little block or something. It's not particularly helpful.
We're not quite ready to move yet. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question about the narrow lots and the secondary suite and the coach house on one lot. Is that being done in other municipalities? And what is the experience with it?
Well, Madam Chair, it is something that, certainly my experience in Richmond, Surrey, no, it was not done in Richmond and Surrey. Typically, the coach housing zoning would allow a typical coach house in the back, which would be a muffin top or whatever you want to call it, a unit above the garage. But in those communities, secondary suites are not permitted. Our thinking around that issue really stems from having secondary suites as a recognized element in single-family homes, and the fact that within this area, we felt with housing choices and potentially units on the same street, one having a 4-unit project, one having a triplex, another one duplex, another one with a coach house, and potentially a secondary suite, we felt that kind of a mix was not necessarily appropriate within the housing choices area, or neighborhood attached residential. We would certainly not advocate that throughout the single-family areas throughout Coquitlam, but in this area, because of the diversity of housing choices and products that you may have in this area, we felt it would not be out of character. And really, when you look at someone having the option of doing a triplex or a quadruplex versus a subdivision with suites and coach houses, you really have to look at their incentive in terms of whether they want to sell the units and stratify them and sell them off, whether they want it as their own mortgage helper. Really, there's a variety of reasons for someone doing that. And we felt, by and large, we would tolerate that kind of variety and creativity in terms of what may happen in this particular area, which we were viewing really differently than other areas.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. I kind of think that people may be doing it anyway if it's not allowed, and so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I guess you can see there's lots of things to discuss in here, and I would like to see, one of the things I would like to see, I do not agree at this point in time with having suites and coach houses. I think when we're going to have to deal with this in the Northeast anyhow, and when we're talking about Northeast Coquitlam, this is a brand new area. The streets are probably not going to be the same with some. In Maillardville, we have some big, wide streets, wide lanes down there. We have lots of things. So the difference in housing choices are absolutely, I guess, night and day in most areas. So if we go that way, we need to somehow, especially for the Northeast, which we're not talking about now, but I really want to discuss coach houses and suites. And we need to have a restrictive covenant. We need to have all kinds of things, which we yet to have explore. So that's one thing. And I would like to hear what the solution is for that before I go into the stuff down here, because we have other council members. The mayor has not seen this yet. We have Councillor McDonnell, who has yet to see it as well. So I don't know what your wishes are. Mine are I would like to just move this forward without recommendations to another workshop. Or do you want to just move it to the next workshop we have, which is December?
Yeah.
Would that be good?
Move it to the next.
Okay. So if I could have that motion?
Second.
Second, wow, all in favor? Opposed, carried. So we have one, I think, scheduled for December 2nd. And if you can come back with some of the answers that we've sort of discussed, and I think it's really good. Thank you, Russell, for all your work on this. I know how confusing it is. And if any members of council would like to go and see some of these actually on the ground, I'll drive. That should scare you. Yes. Yes. Obviously, no one wants to go now. But we could go and just take a look at them, because once you see them, it just becomes very, very clear. But we need the clarity to make this decision, I think. So, okay, we're done, are we?
That is the last formal item on the agenda, Madam Chair.
Move adjournment? Second, all in favor, opposed, carried. You two are bad today.